Здравейте, скъпи приятели! Добре дошли в подкаста на U-Digest, подкаста, в който си говорим за много интересни теми. Днес наш гост е един изключително интересен журналист, Лука Щайнман. Той е швейцарско-италиански военен кореспондент и журналист на свободна практика, който е написал няколко изключително интересни книги за това какво става по време на война. Най-интересната му книга, според мен, тя е издадена и на български, се нарича Руския фронт и от първо лице той разказва какво точно става в окупираните от Русия части на Украйна. Mr. Steinman, thank you very much for agreeing to be a part of U-Digest's podcast. You're a person that has read a lot of books about military history, about military things. What is your motivation to do this? What is your motivation to go into an active war zone and describe the events going on there?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here today. And well, I have to say, unlike most other journalists, that would say I'm going to war zone because I want to do something for the community, for the information, for the sake of the goodness, I didn't start like this, and I'm probably still not working like that. I started to go, let's say, to war and crisis areas out because of my personal interest, like I think I'm a curious person and I wanted to become a journalist. I was studying at university. I was at my, let's say, latest stage of studying. And I was into like international relations, and I was asking myself, how can I know better the world, which is a job that is giving me more opportunities to travel, to go throughout the world, and to get in touch with people, to be into the mechanism that is developing international relations, political crisis, migration, and so on. And I thought that journalism was the best way, because you could also try, to be a diplomat or a politician, but in this case, you're a little bit bound, to some restrictions. I mean, if you're a diplomat, you're representing a country, and you can go, for instance, just there where your country says it's allowed or appropriate to go. Well, as a journalist, you don't have these limits. So I started this job just out of personal motivation and curiosity. And once there, I was doing quite interesting and strong experiences, among others, reporting from the areas of Ukraine controlled by Russia. And I realized there, and in also other situation, that I was also a witness of an historical moment. Okay, so not just a journalist reporting day by day what was happening, but really someone that had and has the privilege to report, to write things, to put them down, and to make sure they don't get forgotten. So, like, my motivation really became this one: the the idea, the feeling, the perception of being in the middle of an historical process, of being there where history is taking place. So this is actually my main motivation: being there, observing history, being there where historical events take place, about which we will read in history books in the next years and decades. And well, I was there, and so who but me can understand this moment, this process better? So this is actually what is really pushing me to do this work today.
Grazie. But Mr. Steinman, you have a book that is yet to be translated to Bulgarian, Vita al fronte, Donbass, Gaza, Syria, Nagorno-Karabakh. In Bulgarian, we would say Живота на фронта. And this book is based on some of the biggest conflicts around Europe. So you've been to all of those places. What is the common denominator between those wars? What do we see in a modern war in the 21st century?
Well, I would say that first of all, there is not any so-called international order anymore, and that also the international right is very weak and very limited. I'm seeing everywhere that, let's say, geopolitical actors like players, Russia, United States, Iran, Arab countries, are trying to reach their their own goals, whatever it costs, And so there is not a common understanding, but the one of the weapons and the one of the economical pressure. Is the first. This is the first point. Then we can see that every war is linked to other wars, and because every war I have been, or almost every war I have been, is a local war, like so being mainly created by local issues that quickly develops in an international war fought on the ground by international powers, which fight each other directly or through proxies. So through local actors that are paid, armed, and controlled by these external political powers. Let me be concrete and let me make examples. Let's take into consideration the war in the Middle East. Okay, the war in the Middle East and what we're seeing now in Iran, in Gaza, and in Lebanon is just a continuation. It's just the latest phase of an international war that has been fought for decades in the region. I remember, for instance, around 10, 15 years ago, when I was following the war in Syria. The war in Syria was a local war between the Assad regime and local groups and militias opposing to him, that quickly became an international war fought on the one side mainly by Iran, that was supporting and helping the Assad government, the Assad regime. And on the other side, the rebel groups were helped by the United States, by the United Kingdom, and we have to underline this, usually by Israel as well, whose goal was the one of avoiding Iran creating strong bases in Syria through this war that would enable Tehran to challenge and to threaten or to directly bomb against Israel. So this war was just the preliminary phase of the ongoing war in the Middle East. The main difference is now that the actors started to fight against each other directly. So there's not a Syrian war anymore, but there is a direct confrontation between Iran and its allies, mainly Hezbollah, on the one side, and Israel and the United States on the other side. And we can show this also in other wars, like think the Russian-Ukrainian war. This is uh, this is a civil war, but as in partly, and it's a civil war partly in the Donbass region as well. But at the same time, as all we know, it became an international war. The Americans and the Brits mainly, and the NATO countries on the one side, supporting through different means Ukraine, and Russia, that was till 2022 formally just supporting the pro-Russian movements in eastern Ukraine. De facto, Russia was already in, and starting from 2022, they got directly, officially, publicly involved in this conflict, which is, again, as a Middle Eastern conflict can be seen as a mixture between a local conflict and an international war fought on the expenses of Ukrainians, as the other wars are fought on the expenses on the local civilians, on the local population.
Thank you for that answer. I do have to ask you this. From all of those wars, whether we're talking about the war in Ukraine, the war in Syria, we have tens of thousands, up to millions of people who flee those regions. Yet you, on your own free will, decided to go there and put your life at risk. Did you feel you were taking a professional risk, a moral risk as well, going into an active war zone?
Well, for of course, I mean, this work has some special features, I would say, since you take into consideration that you take risks. This is not just a war. I think you need to have a passion for this, like a feeling for this. Like you need to be willing to go there. So there is also personal motivation for you to be on the ground. At the same time, I think that you as a journalist, you should never forget that is primarily a work. So like you shouldn't go on the ground just like this with no preparation, no information, and you shouldn't put your life at risk, like with no precise goal. Also because otherwise many media, I'm a freelancer, so I speak with different newsrooms. Many newsroom will consider you just as a crazy guy that goes wherever you send him. It may be just for a few money. No, it shouldn't be like this. You should remember that you go there out of passion, but this is a work, and this has to have a prize and a professional recognition. And so I would say, yeah, this is the first point that we have to remember. A second very important point in my work is that it's easy to have strong feelings once you're there, because you see people being displaced, you see people being deported, you see people being killed, you see bombardments destroying houses, buildings, villages, communities, and it's very easy to feel uh, to, to have feelings for the environment you are in, and to become somehow to side with the part you're covering from. But you have to remember that you're a journalist and that you're not there to act as an activist with using information as a weapon, but you are there to be someone that is independent, that really wants to try to portray the situation as close as it is to the truth, or what do you think being the truth, because I can make a mistake, everyone can make mistakes, but there's a huge difference between like trying to be biased or making eventually mistakes by really trying to be objective. And sometimes when I read my old report, like maybe from 10 years ago, sometimes I think, oh my God, I was so good in this. Like, I was really brave and courageous. And sometimes I think, oh my God, but no, but now with the knowledge I have today, I wouldn't frame this story like this. But, what can I say? I can say that I'm not perfect, that of course my reporting would always be kind of biased because if I see in the moment the side from one side. Let's make a concrete example. When I'm in Ukraine and I'm in the city of Donetsk controlled by Russians, and I see the bombardments of the Ukrainian army on the city. Of course, I have a biased view because I'm just seeing the bombardments of the Ukrainians on Donetsk and not on the Russians on Kiev, on Odessa or other cities. But this doesn't mean that my biased perspective is not reporting correctly what is specifically happening in the city of Donetsk. So of course I am biased, and of course, like to have a larger picture, you should also confront my work with the one of other colleagues being in Kiev, Odessa, or other cities. But this doesn't mean that my work on the ground may be not good. So I think that for me personally, the war in Ukraine was a great lesson of journalism, because I was reporting from the areas controlled by Russians for many months. For a very almost 1 year, writing for media that for Western media that were having, especially at the start of the conflict, a strong pro-Ukrainian position. So I had to defend my credibility both in front of the Russians, not to make them think that I'm an enemy, a propagandist, or worst case scenario, a spy, which is actually sometimes some things that Russians are obsessed of, not only them, and that can have very serious consequences on you on the ground. But at the other time, I had to defend my independence and my credibility towards my Western audience that might think that since I'm with the Russians alongside and following the soldiers alongside this war, I may be biased or Kremlin aligned, whatever. So I had really just and have just my credibility and my professionality to tell guys, look, I'm really a journalist here. I'm trying to do my work, judge it according to the quality of my work, but be sure that I'm here to try to make the most independent work as possible. And last but not least, I'm doing this not just simply because of ethical things, but this is really because like trying to be professional and independent is the best business card I can have in my work, is my guarantee that my work can be not guarantee, but is a very good way through which my work can be appreciated. So, like to make it simple, trying to follow the truth is the best way to make this work and the best way to be appreciated, really.
Well, you did mention the bombing of Donbass. This is, I should say, a very strong factor in the pro-Russian propaganda. And we do have, besides the real war, an information war, a propaganda war. It's very active here in Bulgaria, very active in Europe, very active in Russia. There is a fight about the facts. Each side tries to present not just versions of a moral story, but facts as well. So when you're there, your main objective as a journalist is to present the facts. And you describe choosing a third path beyond wartime propaganda. But how do you define this third path?
Well, propaganda doesn't work only through lies. Let's be clear out of this. And I can really see this in wars. Like it can be based on lies, like saying there is a bombardment there done by the one side. Let's take the war in Lebanon now. Someone bombarding a house and Israeli claiming Hezbollah to be responsible and Hezbollah claiming the Israelis being responsible, okay? And these are proper lies. But generally, uh, the most effective propaganda works by cherry picking information and just choosing those that are aligned to its own storytelling. So let me make you an example. You go into a village in Ukraine, and this happens, I'm sure, from both sides, that has been just conquered. And I'm making this as my experience, but I will tell also about the experience of my colleagues on the other side. A village that has just been conquered by by Russians, okay? And generally, you find this situation in these villages. You find a part of the village that is damaged or destroyed. You have maybe 80% or 70% of the population that left. And then you have a minority that stayed out of different reasons. Some because they're very old and don't want to escape. Some because they are supporters of Russia and they were waiting the Russians to come. Some others because they just want to live in their homeland and they say, I will stay here, whatever it takes, no matter who will be ruling here. And in this case of situation entering these villages with the Russian troops, you generally you find people welcoming them, like giving them eggs, bottles of vodka, chocolate, and some other people that you see that are against them. And the cherry picking works like this. Maybe you interview, you put on camera those just that are supporting Russia, while the other one, you don't show them. And you're not saying technically a lie, because those people are really aligned with Russia, but they don't represent all the pictures. So you see in this way how the propaganda works. And I can make this example because I was following Russians, but I was confronting myself with many journalists following the Ukrainian army, and it's exactly the same, like it works exactly the same. Or let me make like to go to recent hours, what is happening in Lebanon. There has been like the killing of some journalists in Lebanon by the Israeli army, claiming that some of these journalists, were part of Hezbollah because they were writing for media that were closed or controlled by Hezbollah. And I think this is something very dangerous, because if you legitimize killing someone because he's aligned with your enemy, although he's not a fighter, well, then, like, if you use this idea, then Russia would be justified to bomb, I don't know, Polish or Ukrainian journalists working in Ukraine because they might not be allied with the Russian storytelling, but with one of Russia's enemy, So it's very dangerous what is happening, today also with targeting journalists because you consider them of being aligned with the enemy. And this is happening in the worst case, like in the war of Gaza and in Lebanon, with considering journalists as a legitimate military target, killing them. But this is happening also in Europe in other ways, So, like, if you are seen by one, or in Russia, of course, as well, if you are seen by one side as someone reporting the version of the enemy, not just being aligned, but reporting the version of the enemy, then you are someone that has to be targeted professionally, not invited to conferences, isolated. And I think this is very dangerous because if we do like this, we're giving up our first democratic principle that we have in Europe, that there should be a free press, and this free press should be able to work as soon as and to be free to work as soon as we find out that they are making propaganda in both ways, like both lying and manipulating. But I fear that one of the big risks that we're facing in Europe today is exactly this, in name of the wars we are fighting or we are supporting, we also target journalists professionally while giving up the liberty that we conquered for us to have an independent journalism.
You mentioned something very interesting. Propaganda works best when you have facts and truth and you mix them. But when you're somewhere and you see something that you see can be used for propaganda purposes, have you ever had an internal dialogue? Should I self censor? Should I report this the way I see it? Should I wait a couple of weeks before I publish the story? Have you had such moral dilemmas? Where you have to.
Yes, I wouldn't call it like a moral dilemma, but I would call this as something very concrete, because when you work on the field, especially in zones, you realize that you have a responsibility towards your own audience and your own credibility in reporting all everything you see and you think it's correct and verified. But at the same time, you have a responsibility towards, for instance, your sources and as well as your security, because you know that by publishing something that is not liked by the government, the regime that is, or the militaries that are controlling the areas you're in, well, this can have consequences. And for me, I mean, I can live, go to Italy where I live, go back and do another work, whatever, even if they kick me out from this area, from the country. But for my people there, for my translator, for my driver, for the people I trust there and that are very important for my work on the ground, well, this can have very serious consequences because they're living there, they have family there, and I really realize how my work could potentially ruin their lives and their existence, theirs and the one of their families. So there were moments, I'm thinking Syria, in Russia as well, in Ukraine, where I said, okay, there's a news here, but I have to think properly how to publish it, Also knowing that, the newsroom, the people I speak with my newsroom at home, they generally don't have the full picture of the situation I'm in, So if I tell them I have a news, they would like to publish it immediately, no matter what the consequences would be for me and for my people. So it happened for me sometimes, to use like nicknames for people, like calling someone Ahmad rather than Muhammad, or Yuri rather than Sergey, or describing situation like the environment in which I met them slightly different than the one I met there without changing the general picture, but in order to avoid the people that were speaking me to be found, and this is also something very delicate because you don't want to lie, but at the same time you don't want to give some details that would put them eventually in troubles. And sometimes I just waited. You waited a couple of time, and then you publish it in a moment where you know that your people have left from there, that you left, or just the political momentum has passed. So I mean, the publication of this news is now it's now easier. I remember, for instance, when I went to the region of Kherson in southern Ukraine, controlled by Russia, there were parts of the countryside, especially, where you could feel a widespread anti-Russian feeling, very differently compared to Donetsk or Lugansk, where generally what you feel is a pro-Russian feeling. And yeah, but I was there in an area where you were having this news kind of scoop because no one had ever been there, and you could realize that there was a relevant part of the population hostile to Russians, but at the same time there were Russian soldiers everywhere there, or like controlling the ground. So I was trying, and theoretically, there the referendums for the annexation to these areas, the reunification of the, as Russian called them, to Russia, had won with 80-90%. So a great majority was supposed to vote for the annexation to Russia, and it was obvious that it was not the case. So I have to find ways, to put in a way to show this, but yeah, like to make it as acceptable as possible.
From what you're describing, it seems that your experience in war zones is a little bit depressing because you see a lot of death, pain, suffering, destruction. But you must have seen some emotional moments of humanity, of compassion. Can you tell us something that has struck you?
Yeah, I mean, there are both sides. For sure, there are many tragedies, but as many people say, like in the difficult moments, you have the worst and the best coming out from people. So you find lots of tragedies, lots of difficult moments, but also I found lots of hope, generosity, and truly people that truly and sincerely helped me and helped others without asking anything back. Um, I went to many areas, and like you get continuously invited by people to spend time with them, like people that have nothing. I think during the war in Syria, people that were having almost nothing left but a piece of bread, a couple of eggs, and some tea, and they were sharing these with you. They were willing to share it because they were thinking, we might be dead tomorrow, we might be killed. Let's enjoy friendship with the little that we have, and let's enjoy life as much as we can. We don't think too much in advance, but we just try to be as friendly as we can. And also, not everyone, of course, but many people get a closer feeling towards religion in this moment, because I mean, you start thinking not just because. Or maybe for some of them for sure. Someone saying I lost everything. I've just got to help me. That might be the truth, but many people are thinking. I mean, in these moments where you see your life, you know that your life could end at any time. You ask yourself bigger questions, larger questions, deeper questions: who I am, who I am belonging to, and then God comes into the room. So this brings lots of spirituality, like soldiers praying before going to fight, people praying in chapels or in mosques while bombs and rockets are falling around. And at the same time, me personally, I developed some very strong friendship, I would say, also with some people. I was sharing risky risky moments of life with, because like once you risk the life together. And once you are in the same trench, in the same car, driving quickly under bombardments, I mean, you are like, this can strengthen the relationship. I know that I'm in the hands of my driver, and someone knows that he's in my hand in case he gets injured, and I have to medicate him. And this, not always, but in some cases, creates and created strong feelings. So I can say I developed like a few strong relationships and friendships here and there, which is very important on a human level. But at the same time, you have to be careful, because having a friendship on the one side might push you to report in a biased way, to identify too much on his side, and so, like, there is this delicate balance. I'm a friend of yours, I'm a great friend of yours, but at the same time, I have to be as much independent as independent as I can in my work. Then, of course, we're human, so there have been wars or moments in which I felt to be siding more on the one side than on the other side, and it is perfectly fine that I speak in private about this with my friends or my people on this, and it's perfectly fine. I didn't do this thing, but it would be perfectly fine if I go to conferences abroad or to television and they ask me, okay, what do you think about this? And I give my opinion, I give my analysis. But this has to be considered strictly separated to the journalistic work. And I think we should mention exactly, okay, this is my personal analysis, this is my personal vibe towards this. This is not a report.
Mr. Steinman, you are Swiss Italian, and Switzerland is world famous for its neutrality. It seems that this part of your cultural heritage is also seeping into your journalistic point of view. But I have to ask you this: can neutrality itself be perceived as a political stance in such high intensity war zones and ideological conflicts?
Um, I think it can when it comes to individuals, to be above the par. And, neutrality means not having a position, not having a feeling. I would rather say being above the parts. I can have a feeling, I can have an impression, I can have a personal opinion on this, but I want to report being above. So, like, seeing it from seeing the conflict from above, having the privilege that, as you said, I'm not coming from war areas. I don't have a family there, I don't have relatives there, I don't have to fear many consequences. So I have the privilege to be above the parts and report. But at the same time, I think neutrality, it's very, very difficult to be implemented on a political level. You were mentioning Switzerland, which is one of my two countries. Switzerland is a neutral country formally. It's written on its own constitution. But what does it mean being neutral? There is a very big ongoing debate in Switzerland right now, because recently the Swiss parliament and the Swiss government, like, gave an interpretation of neutrality in a way that was not accepted by all Swiss people, and some Swiss people consider it to have broken the neutrality. For instance, when it comes to Russia, Switzerland didn't send directly weapons to Ukraine, but agreed to have sanctions against Russia. And so, I mean, this is an interpretation of neutrality that's not on which not all people agree on. And also, very recently, Switzerland de facto accepted the possibility of selling weapons to Ukraine indirectly. So, while before Switzerland, Swiss companies were not allowed to sell weapons to companies or governments in case there would be the risk that these end up in war zones. Now this rule has been abolished by the government and by the parliament. So this is, you see, another step putting Switzerland more on the side of the West and of Russia, and this is breaking a bit its neutrality. At least it is seen like this from the Russian side. So this is weakening the the possibility of Switzerland to being a mediator in this war, since it's seen by Russia as aligned with Ukraine, as aligned with the West, since Swiss weapons are ending up in Ukraine. So, as you see, neutrality is something that can be really interpreted in a very flexible way, and I'm not sure there is really the like I don't have any states in mind that are really being 100% neutral, because there are national interests, there are specific interests, there are foreign influences, but I think that individuals can, and I think that journalists should.
As a journalist, you have definitely seen in the last couple of years the, how should we say, the life cycle of war coverage. So a war starts, it's all over the news, it's breaking news, then the coverage becomes daily news, then it moves to the end of the news cycle, and then we don't hear anything about it. The war in Syria, more than 12 years, now doesn't even make the news. There's war in Yemen, hardly anyone mentions that there's a war in Mali, all different wars in Africa. At what point do we forget about an ongoing war? And why does this happen? When do we accept this as mundane, regular, don't even bother what's happening?
Yeah, uh, unfortunately, it's perfectly true what you're saying. And I think it's a matter like it's linked to how our media, our mass media linked to social networks work. There are when a phenomenon starts, not just a war, everyone is focused on it. This may be a crisis, this may be a singer becoming famous. So at a certain point, you find yourself on the media and social media full with information about someone or something that you were not aware of till a few hours or a few days before, and then suddenly another news comes, and the interest completely decreases. You may remember, for instance, the last time of COVID. Okay, we're all speaking of COVID, and then at a certain moment, Russia invaded Ukraine, and this was not the news anymore, But since few hours before, few days before, that was top news, and this is exactly the same principle that it works for every war, Like when a war starts, there is a huge interest around this, and for a journalist, there are also many, for a freelance journalist like me, there are many newsroom, many clients asking me for the coverage. So let me make you the best example for this, which is the wars in Lebanon. When a war in Lebanon starts, it's very easy to reach Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, because generally the airport stays open and you don't need a visa. So everyone can theoretically go there, just book a flight, land there, and go into a hotel. The war in Lebanon is generally fought just in parts of the countries, in specific areas. So you have areas of Beirut, of the capital, where everything is more or less normal, at least on a first view. Open streets, open shops, people around. So it seems that the war is not there. And so you have plenty of journalists going there because there is an interest, because they are sent, or because they just see a professional opportunity. And generally, these journalists, most of them, they end up staying and sleeping in the same hotel or in the same hotels. Why? Because like someone comes there, hears from another one that there is a room there, he goes there, and these hotels become very interesting places, to make network, to stay out of colleagues, but it becomes a bubble that has generally nothing, no contacts, nothing to do with the reality of the people outside that bubble. And journalists start to cover more or less about the same news each time, and we have our media filled with this information, with more or less the same stories. And then at a certain moment, the war finishes, or there is another event somewhere else, and the attention on Lebanon decreases. So 90% of the journalists goes away, the requests from the newsroom are very low, get very low, and suddenly it seems that the war in Lebanon is over. Well, maybe it's even worse than before, or at least it's going on. But because of this mechanism, you don't have these wars on radars anymore. And this is something that, I mean, we have to be careful of this, because we don't have to measure the gravity of a war or of every event based on the amount of news that we have on them. So this is something very important. And then another very central point is that some countries started, or some armies started, just to forbid journalists to enter areas where they are fighting so that you can have no news from there. The classical example is Gaza, where we have a war that is ongoing now from more than 3.5 years, and we don't have one single independent journalist that could make into this. So this is a big question, like, why? I think the answer is pretty easy, but when the Israeli government is contesting, the fact that it's saying Hamas is lying and the numbers they're showing they're not true, they may be right, but why don't you allow then an independent press to go into the Gaza Strip to verify that what Hamas is doing is fake? So we are really seeing that some governments are trying to cut the access to journalists on certain areas. And even if we have lots of information ongoing, like citizen journalism and like everyone that can film with a mobile phone, at the same time, you really see the missing, you really feel the missing of independent reporters on the ground that can give you the guarantees that they are trying to do their work as good as they can. And yeah, unfortunately, the freedoms of journalists are not necessarily getting wider within the last years.
Mr. Steinman, a final question for this interview. You mentioned a lot of things. We've discussed propaganda, we've discussed war, we've discussed outright lies. But I think there is one thing we didn't mention: AI generated videos, doctored photos, everything like that being used to gather sympathy for one cause or another. But you have a book that our Bulgarian listeners and readers can get. They can read it. I'm talking about the Russian front, Rуския front. There is one thing that our readers can take from it. What should it be?
You mean from my book,
Yes,
or?
from the book, from your
Yeah,
description.
I would say I will link this to the point related to the artificial intelligence that you just mentioned. That today, with artificial intelligence, and tomorrow even more, and next year even more and more, we can portray everything. We can show Tel Aviv being completely bombarded. We can show, Roberto Baggio scoring the penalty in the World Cup in 1994, even when he missed it. We can do everything. But at the same time, what artificial intelligence and technology will never be able to replace is having independent journalists on the ground, again, that are trying to do their job. So um, that's why I think like my work in Russia, Ukraine got so much attention. Not because I was the only journalist. There were other journalists like affiliated to the Kremlin or like internationals that are more activists, more Telegram activists that are supporting the Russian cause. But I was not the only one reporting about an event. But my work was seen by most people as independent, unlike the work on the others. And this is something that artificial intelligence will never be able to replace. You need a human to be on the ground. You need a human at the end to verify facts. And you need a human, again, to describe the situation in the most correct way possible, uh, without being affected by propaganda. Because, as we said before, propaganda is not just lying, but put the news into the context and put the news in a proper role. And this is something that robots and artificial intelligence are not able to do, and that's why the human reporting will be central. But and not only reporting, but generally, let's go back to October 7th, 2023, when Hamas attacked with this terrorist attack the Israeli territories around the Gaza Strip. Um, what was the main mistake done by Israelis? They were missing human intelligence. They were having all technology possible, but they didn't have good information from the ground. And this makes a huge difference, and this can be applied in intelligence, in journalism, but also in business. Come on, it's not the same thing like to see someone like through a Zoom call, or to go in person and meet someone and shake his hand. This makes a difference. So the reporters, might they be like journalistic reporters, like business people, or like police people, they their presence on the ground will be always needed. And I would add, thank God.
Mr. Steinman, thank you very much for participating in this interview. Благодаря ви, че изгледахте този разговор. Надявам се, че ви е бил интересен. Можете да си намерите преведената на български език книга "Руския фронт" на Лука Щайнман. Наистина ви я препоръчвам. Можете да се абонирате за подкаста на U-Digest. Всичко добро. Right. Thank you very much. This was
Thank you so much.
Recording. We'll generate subtitles, translate them to Bulgarian, and once we're ready, I will send you the link. And I do think there is going to be more interest in the book. I've read it personally. Excellent job.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And really, thank you so much for taking time. We're just 2 minutes over the time, so
No, so again, sorry for being late, but like I ran out of it. But thank you for the chance of being with you, and I hope we can meet next time. I'll be in Bulgaria, if there'll be a next time, but I'm sure there will be.
well, I had COVID when your book was
Wow.
supposed. Yeah, there is still COVID.
Still.
Yeah. So otherwise, I would have been there. I'm quite good friends with those people. We're part of the same organization. So yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording now, and I do wish you a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much. Yours as well, to you as well. And anything I can do for you, we will stay in touch. We have our contacts.
Great. Ciao.
Okay. Bye. Thank you. Bye bye. Ciao.